Mizzou football's motto has been something to prove, but I'm going to give them some things to improve coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Obviously back here in bucolic Boone County, Missouri, back from my vacation in Destin, Florida. Nice to be back here in the luxurious confines of the Locked On Mizzou studio. No question about that, though a good time was had on vacation. And on today's program, speaking of Florida, I want to talk about Jayvan Boggs from Cocoa, Florida, cutting his decision down to just 2 teams. I'll tell you if the Tigers made the cut. Also, the Tigers seemingly going all in on football. Ironically, good news for Dennis Gates, in my humble opinion. Also want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And you know what? Missouri, while all offseason I've been spending a lot of time praising Missouri's offense, talking about what a high upside operation, I think they can be absolutely the best offense in the country this upcoming season. I think saying that they're a top 10 unit, that we should almost expect that, I don't think that's unreasonable at all, considering all of Missouri's returning production, in particular at the quarterback position. Anytime you have a third-year starter, a fifth-year guy in the program, hey, I've gone on and on about this. But the point is, there is still obviously things that Missouri and every team can improve on. You're never actual perfection in football. This game simply does not allow that. And after taking a fairly deep dive into the statistics, hey, I had a lot of time on the airplane on the way home, and what do? Talk to my family? I don't think so. I've had just about enough of my family after a beach vacation. So what do? Immerse myself in football stats. And what did I come up with? Well, interestingly enough, Luther Burden was relied on maybe even more than you would have expected last season. Burden, in fact, led the SEC in target share last year, as nearly 34% of Missouri's passes were thrown Burden's way. And by the way, 4 of Cook's interceptions last year, 4 of his 6 interceptions last season came while targeting Burden. So, oh no, he's forcing it to Luther Burden. Isn't this terrible? Well, I don't know. To me, even 4 of 6, that's a little bit of a sketchy scenario there to draw conclusions based on what is a relatively small sample size there, just in terms of the interceptions. Now, interceptable balls, that's also another story. Balls that were deemed to could have been interception or in danger, balls that were at least deflected by a defender at some point. Well, that percentage went up fairly significantly as well while targeting Burden. But at the same time, again, I don't think we should overanalyze this and start saying, well, obviously Missouri should stop forcing the ball to Luther Burden. Really, more my conclusion there would be to realize that Missouri certainly doesn't have to force the ball to Luther Burden. The only reason to do that is to what? Get him a better chance at a Heisman Trophy by the stat-chasing voters at the Downtown Athletic Club and beyond. I'm just not into that scenario personally. Let's throw to the guy who's open. Let's throw to the person who's going to help move the chains and all that good stuff. I have all the confidence in the world that that's exactly what Kirby Moore and Brady Cook are going to do. In particular, the more you look at it, I think Brady Cook and Luther Burden have a really good relationship on and off the field. I think that it's not going to be some diva wide receiver scenario like, say, I don't know, Terrell Owens in the past or something like that with Tony Romo. So To me, that's not something I would worry about. But one thing I believe that Brady Cook in particular can improve upon this coming season and take not only his game, but the entire Missouri offense to another level, in my humble opinion, is really the intermediate passing game. We're talking about like 10 to 20 yards downfield. I think Cook improved tremendously from 2022, that is, to 2023 last season. But between, again, about 10, 11 to 20 yards downfield, depending on which metric you use. Some places track that a little bit differently than others. But regardless, it's more just, it seemed like a lot of times Missouri's throwing a lot of screen passes, a lot of swing passes, a lot of outside zone runs in particular. I'm going to get to that here in just a little bit. But then a lot of chunk plays last season, downfield, a lot of play action passes that took shots deep down the sidelines and down the deep middle part of the field as well. But statistically, it's just impossible to argue that Cook has been good at that spot. We're now looking statistically now for 2 straight seasons that Cook has been pretty significantly below average compared to the rest of the league in the intermediate part of the field. So, with that being said, if Cook and the rest of the Missouri offense, because obviously those things are obviously very much connected, the receivers, the O-line, the quarterback, it's all very much connected. If he and the rest of the offense can improve on passing to that part of the field, on top of last season's significant improvements by Cook in the offense, boy, look out there. And really, if that happens, I think maybe the biggest reason for that, beyond Cook himself, will be Missouri tight end Brett Norfleet, a true freshman last season, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong there. Maybe he took a red shirt. Regardless, that was his biggest taste at playing time last season. I think he's got a huge chance as a sophomore to really break out in the Missouri passing game. And again, he could be the biggest reason if Missouri improves in the intermediate part in the passing game. I think Brett Norfleet could be a huge reason why. Now, like I said, even if the Missouri offense doesn't improve really at all in terms of the intermediate passing game, you're still looking at a really, really good offense. Obviously, that's what Missouri was in 2023. But if there is something that could potentially stall this Missouri offense, and to be fair, I think I've been overlooking this as much as anybody this offseason, it is the running game. I do think specifically the outside zone running game that Missouri leaned on so heavily and so effectively last season. If it's not as effective without Cody Schrader, well, that's going to be a big problem because so much of Kirby Moore's scheme last season, and to be fair, Eli Drinkwitz's season in general before last season, was based around that outside zone stretch play, whatever you want to call it. But the good news is Missouri has replaced some really important parts on the offensive line, obviously. Notably, Javon Foster at left tackle. Presumably, he's going to be replaced by Cayden Green, the transfer from Oklahoma. And no matter where Green ends up lining up, I'm assuming left tackle at this point, I think it's safe to say he should be productive. I think that's really, really safe to say because even though, again, I did a big stat dive here on vacation. Even though Cayden Green's metrics were just okay last season, you'd say, well, he's about an average offensive lineman in the Big 12 last season. Keep in mind that he was a true freshman, okay? So just a few months before that, he was attending the senior prom. So that's really an impressive feat in itself when you put it in that context. And he played basically every snap for the Sooners. Most of it at guard, a little bit at tackle. Again, we're assuming he's moving to left tackle. I also think he's pretty much obviously open to playing anywhere. But Missouri, I think, should enjoy a nice leap in production this fall as long as, again, you keep that outside zone scheme going. If Missouri, if Marcus Carroll, if Nate Noel, either one of those guys or hopefully a combination of both in some ways is able to do that, well, I think Missouri's offense is going to be just fine. Really, that outside zone scheme really another season, a full off season of Brandon Jones, the offensive line coach, being here should be really helpful too. So, by the way, one thing, again, I'm mentioning the left side here because nearly 2/3 of Missouri's outside zone plays went to the left side that last season. Makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Sets up the play action going back the other way a little more naturally for a right-handed quarterback like Brady Cook, especially a guy, he's not Patrick Mahomes. He can't move to the opposite side, his opposite way against the grain, against his natural throwing arm and whip it 45 yards downfield. Very few people can do that. So it makes a lot of sense to run the ball left for Missouri quite a bit, and that just goes to show you one way or the other, Cayden Green is going to be a really important part of Missouri next year. And I want to talk about big-time wide receiver Jayvan Boggs cutting his options down to just 2 teams and what all that means for the Missouri Tigers coming up here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about PXG. And I love golf, but you know what? My mom loves golf too. She recently got herself fit with a new set of clubs, and she was saying immediately, gosh, why didn't I do this years ago? I should have absolutely gotten some new fitted clubs sooner. Well, let me tell you, PXG is absolutely the best place to get fitted for new clubs. I went in and swung the new PXG Black Ops driver with Jacob. He got me fitted for it, the whole deal, an hour-long experience. Really just, frankly, a lot of fun to just bang away on some drivers on a TrackMan for a while. But you know what? If you're thinking about PXG's high-performance equipment, if you think it's too expensive, well, I'm just telling you right now, their clubs often cost quite a bit less than these so-called leading brands. PXG made me a believer. They'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City. 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club and you'll get a dozen free golf balls. That's pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou. Limit 1 dozen golf balls per person. Promotion ends June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply. See store for details. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn is very aware that small businesses have so many different things to do that you might not have the time or resources to hire. Just on vacation, my wife was going, oh no, we forgot to do payroll. Sorry, everybody. So we had to mess around with that on vacation. Do you think we have time to hire a bunch of new people too? Well, that's what LinkedIn Jobs is for. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I've talked on this program quite a bit about Jayvan Boggs from Cocoa Beach. He's a wide receiver that was formerly committed to Ohio State before opening up his commitment just, a couple months ago or so, a few weeks ago or so, something like that. And all indications this whole time is that was a definite breakup. No going back to the Buckeyes for Jayvan Boggs. And one thing that's interesting is, obviously lots of teams, big-time teams like Missouri, Georgia, Southern Cal, all of those teams very much interested in Boggs. Well, he's cut a couple of those teams out. Official visits canceled to Los Angeles and now to Athens, Georgia as well. So now it appears to be a 2-team race. In fact, doesn't appear to be. In fact, from the horse's mouth, Jayvan Boggs tweeted out on X.com, down to 2, no longer taking my official visit to Georgia. So that means it's between Missouri and Central Florida. Now, of course, as I have been talking about, as I talked a little bit about last week, Florida does have some interesting new NIL legislation, some aggressive NIL legislation they're going for here. could this factor into Boggs' decision here? Of course, it's going to be a year or so before Boggs steps on campus anywhere. So in that amount of time, the Missouri laws, as favorable as they are, they seem it wouldn't apply to Boggs because he's not an in-state player. Well, it certainly would apply to Boggs for if he stayed in-house in Central Florida, in-state in Central Florida, it would seem. So going to be interesting to see if that factors in. On paper, it would certainly seem that Missouri has more to offer in terms of a winning program right now. Central Florida's had its moments, but perhaps that moment has passed, and now Missouri's having its moment. So it sure seems like good news for Missouri that Boggs is kind of narrowing it down, and really sort of the traditional blue bloods of USC and Georgia are out of the mix. Just goes to show you once again that we're living in very, very strange and new times in some ways. Now, to me, more good news is that Missouri, as an athletic department right now, seems to be taking this whole new strange world that we're living in and making the best of it. At the very least, the athletic department, the boosters, the NIL infrastructure, well, if there's one thing that they're all aligned on, it seems to be that this is the moment for Missouri Tiger football. Now, Brett Veatch. How many times am I going to do that? No, Laird Veatch, the new athletic director at the University of Missouri, of course, and not the Kansas City Chiefs general manager. No, Laird Veatch had a long interview with Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou, where in a long-standing tradition of Missouri athletic directors, said a lot of words without really saying much of incredible substance. Nothing against Laird Veatch. That just seems to be part of the job description at this point. But the one thing he did make it pretty clear on is that Missouri is pushing all of its chips into the middle of the table on football in general, and specifically the 2024 season. Now, of course, the general part is the big picture, the north end zone, which I think was certainly, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people's opinion, was surprisingly ambitious, this project. And again, it's just shows once again Missouri's pouring everything, especially in terms of resources, into the football program right now. As long as Missouri follows up 23 with another good 24, and frankly, just goes to show once again why a college football playoff appearance would just be massive for this program in so many ways. Or even if they could host a game at Faurot Field, that type of deal. So the ironic thing, though, is if anything, despite the fact that, well, you might think this is bad news for Dennis Gates and Missouri men's basketball, I think ironically that's actually not the case. I actually think right now this takes some pressure off of Gates a little bit, because it's not as though he has a bad NIL infrastructure. Missouri just got Mark Mitchell, a big-time player from Duke. You know, Missouri seems to be doing just fine in terms of the transfer portal and certainly securing highly ranked high school players at the moment as well. So again, if anything, I think this helps Gates, because if Missouri isn't wanting to spend $15 to $20 million buying out a basketball coach the next couple seasons by firing him before his contract is up, well, that probably helps Dennis Gates, doesn't it? It helps take a little bit of the pressure off, I would say, because, I don't know, a few months ago when I saw Jerry Stackhouse getting his $16 million buyout or whatever it was from Vanderbilt, that was a real eyebrow raiser to me, for sure. That made me think, boy, the calculus has changed here a little bit, especially with Desiree Reed-Francois, the woman who not only hired Dennis Gates, but also signed him to an extremely lucrative contract extension that includes that rather massive buyout figure. Well, despite all of that, I think really, again, this is kind of ironic, but I think Laird Veatch and Missouri going all in on football actually helps Dennis Gates' short-term job security. Again, as long as the boosters and the NIL infrastructure are on board with what Coach Gates is doing, I think he's really safe, at least for the long term. Save short of, say, a follow-up 0-19 campaign once again, which I think we can all agree is extremely, extremely unlikely to happen. And coming up on the program, we can finally close the book on the Simeon Barrow chapter in Mizzou football history. And plus, after celebrating my 10th wedding anniversary, I do have some small advice for all of you young dudes out there looking for love and long-lasting relationships. But before we get there, I want to talk about my friends at FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet on it all at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200. That's right, $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on anything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. It's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, former Michigan State defensive tackle Simeon Barrow, certainly a guy that the Missouri Tigers would have taken in the transfer portal process. He ended up ultimately at the University of Miami with the Hurricanes, and, well, there'd been some rumors flying around, no doubt about it. I discussed it on my program. Well, just last Thursday, shortly after I posted my Thursday program, Barrow tweeted out, "There's been a lot of assumptions and rumors about my stance with Miami. I am a Miami Hurricane and concentrating on working hard and this team. Let's get it." So there you go. Simeon Barrow is a Miami Hurricane. We can close that chapter of Locked On Mizzou history for sure. So anyway, just wanted to report that. But before we get out of here on this particular edition of Locked On Mizzou, I do have some sports-related advice for all of you young dudes out there. Because, yes, I was once younger as well. I'm not going to say I'm not young, but I was certainly younger and had a lot less experience, certainly in the women and ladies department. Here's what I'm specifically talking about here. Of course, the NBA Finals is going on right now. The U.S. Open is about to start. Of course, baseball is in full swing. I love my Kansas City Royals. I like watching the Cardinals too, by the way. So if you're a Cardinals fan, don't worry, the Cardinals are my National League squad. No hate whatsoever. The point is, that's a lot. There's a lot happening. I even like soccer these days. So it'd be really easy for me as a guy with 2 young daughters, a wife, to just completely ignore my family and watch sports 24/7. A part of me wishes I could. In fact, that was basically the 25-year-old version of me, the 26-year-old version of me, let's say, when my wife and I first started dating. And famously, our first Valentine's Day, well, she'll never let me live this down. I was basically engrossed with, yes, the NBA All-Star game at the time, which she will never stop making fun of me for. And quite frankly, well-deserved. Well-deserved to be making fun of me for that. And the point with sharing all this with all of you is that young dudes, at a certain point, you just got to realize there's going to have to be some sacrifices made. You're going to have to pick your spots. And yes, you're going to have to compromise on watching sports. The NBA playoffs has been going for a while. Guess what? Pick your spots. You can't watch every single series. You can't even watch every single game of every series before. Figure out the best series. If it's Denver and Minnesota and you feel like you got to watch that, well, you know what? I think your wife will be willing to compromise on that. Or if that person isn't willing to, by the way, this goes for you ladies out there who are sports freaks too. Maybe your man isn't quite as into sports and is going, what is up with her? I'm just saying, compromise. It's the part of any relationship we've all got to figure out. And here's my real tip for you. For those of you out there who don't understand why you own an iPad, if, well, my phone can do everything the iPad can do, listen, get some earbuds, get an iPad. You can stick it in your earbud you can stick an earbud in your ear while you're doing the dishes and stuff like that, while you're out picking weeds. See, multitask. That's what your generation's about, right? multitasking. You can't just sit on your couch and be passive forever. Be active. Get out there, watch the Warriors and the Cavs, watch the NBA Finals, watch the Royals, watch the Cardinals, whatever it might be, but do it on the move, folks. That's what you're going to have to do, because the days of watching every single sporting event, well, that's the purview of a single guy. Do you want to be a single guy forever? No, you don't. It's fun for a while. Trust me, I had my fun watching nothing but sports 24/7 and doing whatever I wanted. But at a certain point, that gets a little pathetic, in my humble opinion. So if you want to actually have a long-lasting relationship like, well, I have here clearly with a 10-year marriage, be like me. Get an iPad and best of all, pick your spots. Your wife will be happy. I promise. It'll work out in the long run. And thanks, as always, for listening to this show. Hopefully it's worked out in the long run for all of you. Hey, in the short run, maybe tell another true son or daughter about this show. LockedOnMizzou.com, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts, ad-free at Amazon Music as well. So until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks, as always, for listening to Locked on Mizzou.